told you that some of the darkest horrors of history weren't born from the shadows of war, but from the sterile halls of science? Would you believe that in the name of knowledge, countless lives were shattered by experiments too twisted for fiction? From medieval times to the modern era, humans have crossed lines to pursue progress, lines that should never have been crossed. Let's start in the heart of the Middle Ages, where the line between science and torture was almost non-existent. Our journey begins in the 14th century. Back then, medical knowledge was primitive, and one of the leading theories was humorism, which claimed that the balance of bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, determined health. This gave rise to the practice of bloodletting, where doctors believed they could cure almost anything by draining blood. But for some, this wasn't just treatment, it was experimentation. During times of plague, some physicians believed the more blood you drained, the better the chances of survival. In some cases, victims were bled nearly dry, their bodies pushed to the brink to see just how much blood they could lose before death claimed them. Instead of curing them, these experiments led to suffering and death, exposing the horrifying consequences of medical ignorance in the guise of science.
Our next tale of twisted experimentation comes from the reign of Frederick II. Obsessed with discovering the natural human language, the language that humans would speak if never influenced by society, Frederick conducted a cruel experiment on newborns. Frederick ordered that these babies be raised in total isolation. They were fed and cared for, but forbidden any form of human interaction, no talking, no affection, no lullabies. The emperor believed this would reveal the original language of humankind, perhaps the language of God. Instead, the experiment resulted in the babies' tragic deaths, their minds starved for the very human connection needed for survival. Jumping forward to the 20th century, we find ourselves in the infamous Nazi concentration camps. In these camps, science was twisted into a tool of terror and genocide. One man stands out as a symbol of this perversion, Dr. Josef Mengele, also known as the Angel of Death. Mengele performed unspeakable experiments, particularly on twins. He injected chemicals into their eyes to try to change their color, conducted surgeries without anesthesia, and even tried to create conjoined twins by sewing siblings together, all in a quest to prove Nazi theories of racial superiority. Thousands died under his scalpel, their pain and suffering written off as scientific progress. But not all evils were confined to authoritarian regimes. In the United States, a public health tragedy unfolded under the guise of a scientific study. The Tuskegee syphilis study began in 1932, with hundreds of African American men diagnosed with syphilis. They were promised free medical care, but instead of treatment, doctors watched the disease progress. These men were left to suffer the ravages of syphilis, blindness, insanity, and death, all to study what the disease would do to a body left untreated. For 40 years, the truth was hidden, and the victims were left to die without ever knowing they had been betrayed by the very people sworn to help them. When the study was finally exposed in 1972, the nation was outraged. Families were left grieving, and the survivors were left wondering why their lives had been used as experiments. Mind control. It sounds like something out of a spy novel, but the US government was determined to make it a reality during the Cold War. Under the MK-Ultra program, the CIA experimented on unsuspecting individuals, using LSD, electroshock therapy, and psychological torture to try and control the human mind. Prisoners, psychiatric patients, and even everyday citizens were drugged and manipulated without their knowledge. The goal? To create mind-controlled assassins, sleeper agents, or truth serums that could extract secrets. But instead, they left behind a trail of broken minds and ruined lives. Some subjects were driven to suicide, others were left in permanent states of psychosis. The very government meant to protect them had become their greatest danger. The scariest part: these experiments were conducted by people who thought they were in the right, in the name of science, in the name of progress. What will future generations say about us? Because the line between discovery and destruction is far thinner than we think. As our technology advances, as science pushes further into new frontiers, how do we ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated? If you want more untold stories from the darker chapters of human history, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, knowledge is power, but unchecked power can be deadly. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.